The night was quiet, the hum of conversation mixing with the soft clinking of glasses. In the corner of the high-end bistro, Marta Felix moved like a shadow, her hands expertly balancing the silver trays laden with gourmet dishes. To the patrons seated at the elegant table, she was nothing more than a waitress, another face in a sea of service. But to Philip Stan, a billionaire businessman with an ego as large as his empire, she was an object of mockery. With a smug smile, he turned to his associates. "Tell me, waitress," Philip sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you even know what it takes to make a billion-dollar acquisition? It's not just numbers and theories, it's about vision, ambition, something you clearly lack." The table tensed, and for a moment, the air itself seemed to freeze. Marta stood still, her eyes locked onto his, but her mind raced. She had heard words like these before. People like him, judging others based on their status. Tonight, though, something inside her shifted. Do you think it's possible for someone to misjudge a person by their job? Let us know below. Marta Felix wasn't always a waitress. She had once been poised to change the world with her work in behavioral economics. At 2008, Marta had earned her PhD, a distinction she wore like a badge of honor. Her research on human behavior and economic trends had caught the attention of several prestigious institutions, and she had been on the verge of taking the academic world by storm. But that was before the funding cuts. One day, her dream of reshaping the future of economic theory was cruelly ripped away, leaving her with nothing but an empty research lab and a shattered vision. The academic world, so eager to embrace her, now had no place for her work. Forced to abandon her dreams, Marta found herself taking a job she never imagined, a waitress in a fine dining restaurant nestled in the city's high-end district. Despite the shift in her life, Marta never let go of the brilliance that once defined her. Beneath her apron, her mind remained sharp, calculating, always observing the world around her. The job was a far cry from the academic future she had envisioned, but she was determined to make the best of it. And in a city where the elite gathered to unwind and bask in luxury, Marta's quiet dignity set her apart. Philip Stan had it all, or so he believed. At 35, he was the head of a billion-dollar empire, his name synonymous with success in the business world. His cold, calculating demeanor had made him a powerhouse in corporate circles. He didn't care about the people around him, unless they could further his agenda. The staff at his favorite restaurant, including Marta, were no more than background figures in his world of wealth and power. As he entered the restaurant with his associates, Philip oozed superiority. His custom-tailored suit fit him perfectly, the subtle scent of expensive cologne trailing behind him. His eyes scanned the room, dismissing the other patrons as if they were insignificant. When his gaze fell on Marta, he barely took notice of her presence, assuming she was just another servant in his world. When Marta approached the table to take their drink orders, Philip glanced up and offered a smirk, his condescending eyes scanning her from head to toe. To him, she was beneath him, someone who existed only to serve. As she took his order with professionalism, his dismissive attitude made it clear that he saw no value in her beyond her uniform. "Have you ever considered using your brain for something more than carrying trays?" Philip asked, his tone dripping with mockery. He was used to this. People like Marta should know their place. The dinner progressed with Philip dominating the conversation, his voice loud and self-assured as he spoke about market trends, acquisitions, and the future of his companies. His associates nodded along, hanging on his every word. Marta, who had learned to stay quiet and observe, moved between the tables with practiced ease, ensuring that the guests had everything they needed. As she approached the table to serve the next course, Philip's voice cut through the air again. "Tell me, waitress," he said, turning toward her with a cocky grin, "what do you think about the market trends I'm discussing? Do you even know what it takes to make a billion-dollar acquisition? It's not all just numbers and theories, darling. It's about vision, ambition, something you clearly lack." The words stung, but Marta didn't flinch. She had been in similar situations before, underestimated, dismissed, judged. But this time, there was something different about Philip's attitude. His words were sharper, more personal. His associates laughed awkwardly, but the tension in the room was palpable. Marta set down the next dish carefully, her fingers brushing against the fine china. She had been mocked before, but something about the arrogance in Philip's tone made her resolve harden. Marta took a slow breath, the weight of the situation settling in. She wasn't a mere waitress, she was a woman with a PhD, with knowledge and insight that could rival anyone at this table. "Mr. Stan," Marta said, her voice calm but firm, "if you think ambition is what makes you successful, then you're missing the bigger picture." The room went quiet. Philip, who had expected a meek response, raised an eyebrow in surprise. His associates paused, unsure of how to react. Marta leaned forward slightly, her intense eyes locking with his. "It's not ambition you need. It's the right strategy, and you've been misapplying every economic theory that could have saved you." Philip's arrogance faltered for just a moment. "What are you talking about?" He sneered, but his voice was edged with uncertainty. Marta didn't flinch. She continued, her voice steady and sharp. "You're overestimating the stability of your portfolio. Your focus on expansion without addressing base market dynamics is reckless. You've already experienced 3 significant failures this quarter." The silence in the room deepened. Marta wasn't backing down, and Philip knew it. He could feel the power shifting. This wasn't just a waitress serving food. This was someone who understood the very foundation of his empire. For a moment, Philip Stan sat frozen, his expression one of disbelief. The laughter from his associates had faded into awkward silence. He had expected Marta to shrink back under the weight of his ridicule, but instead, she had calmly torn apart his entire strategy. He looked at her closely, his sharp eyes trying to read the woman before him. How had she known about his business struggles? How could a waitress, someone with no apparent ties to the corporate world, possibly have the insight to pinpoint his mistakes? "You're mistaken," Philip finally muttered, though there was no conviction behind his words. His mind raced, trying to find a way to dismiss her arguments. "What you're talking about is—" "Don't take my word for it," Marta interjected coolly, her voice cutting through his stammering words. "I'm not here to debate. I'm here to show you where the cracks are forming in your empire. You've been so busy focusing on growth that you missed the signs of your own downfall." The table went silent. Even Philip's colleagues, who had been quietly observing, were now watching Marta with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Philip felt the unfamiliar sting of being challenged in front of his own circle. He leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're overstepping," he said with an air of superiority, though his tone lacked its usual biting edge. Marta met his gaze without flinching. "Am the first?" She paused, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "What if I'm not the one overstepping, but you? What if you've been walking around with blinders on, unable to see the damage you're doing to your own company?" The dynamic in the room shifted once again. Philip's bravado was beginning to crack, and for the first time, Marta felt a rush of confidence she had long buried under the weight of societal expectations. In this moment, she wasn't just a waitress. She was a woman who had poured years of her life into a field that Philip had dismissed without a second thought. Philip's associates exchanged uneasy glances, and Marta noticed the way they now looked at her with something akin to respect. She wasn't just some servant at their table anymore, she was the person who had shaken their leader, the billionaire who seemed untouchable. Marta wasn't trying to be cruel. She wasn't seeking revenge for the way Philip had treated her. But there was something deeply satisfying about watching the arrogance melt away from his face, even if it was only for a moment. Philip opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it again. What could he say? How could he dismiss the woman who had just laid out the harsh truth he'd been blind to? Instead of responding with more mockery, he turned his gaze to the other end of the table, avoiding Marta's eyes. "Do you even know what you're talking about?" he said, trying once more to regain his composure, though his voice had lost its edge. "I'm not here to entertain you," Marta replied, her voice steady. "I'm here to point out the flaws in your plan. That's all." It was a simple statement, but the weight of it hung in the air. Marta wasn't interested in Philip's approval. She didn't need to prove anything to him. As Marta walked away from the table, she didn't feel the usual rush of humiliation that often accompanied moments like these. She had stood her ground, and she could feel the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had made her point. It wasn't about besting Philip. It was about reclaiming her dignity in the face of his condescension. In the kitchen, Marta found herself momentarily alone, the noise of the restaurant fading away into the background. She took a deep breath, leaning against the counter. She had just gone toe-to-toe with a man who, on the surface, had everything: wealth, power, influence. And yet, in that moment, she had taken something from him, his confidence. But as the adrenaline from the encounter began to wear off, a nagging feeling crept in. Was she being reckless? Philip had power. He could make her life difficult if he wanted to. The thought made her uneasy. Could she have handled the situation differently? No, she told herself. She had done what needed to be done. She had shown him that she wasn't to be dismissed, no matter her job or status. But deep down, Marta wondered what this moment would cost her. Would she regret it, or would it be the beginning of something more, something that changed everything? Philip sat at the table, his mind racing, as his associates continued to murmur among themselves. He had been blindsided by Marta's sharp intellect and the quiet power in her words. He wasn't used to being challenged like this. His entire life had been about control, about shaping the world around him to fit his vision. But Marta had somehow pierced through his carefully constructed facade. She had made him question his own arrogance, his own assumptions about the world and people like her. For a moment, he felt small. His mind flashed back to his own business dealings, where his confidence had been his strongest asset. But Marta had not been intimidated by that confidence. Instead, she had dismantled his arguments one by one with the precision of a skilled strategist. Impossible, he muttered to himself under his breath. How could a waitress, no, a PhD, know more about my company than I do? He couldn't shake the image of Marta standing there, her composure unshaken, her words like a scalpel cutting through his bravado. It made him angry, but it also made him think. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a woman serving drinks and food. Marta Felix was someone who saw through the layers of his success and recognized the cracks in his empire that he had ignored for too long. As the evening wore on, Philip's thoughts lingered on her calm, her intellect, her quiet strength. Something had changed in him, though he wasn't sure what. The days after the dinner were long for Philip Stan. He tried to shake the feeling of being outmatched by Marta, but it clung to him like an unwanted shadow. Each time he closed his eyes, he could see her, the woman with the sharp intellect, the quiet dignity, and the strength that seemed to pulse beneath her calm exterior. It unnerved him, this fixation he couldn't explain. At the office, Philip buried himself in his work, drowning in spreadsheets and business plans. He threw himself into meetings with his team, trying to push the memory of Marta out of his head. But every time a decision needed to be made or a calculation was off, he couldn't help but wonder, what would Marta have said? It had only been a few days since their interaction, but he couldn't escape the nagging question, how could a woman who waited tables have such a profound understanding of business strategy? More importantly, why was it that she had left him feeling vulnerable? He didn't like it. Philip had always been in control. But with Marta, control slipped through his fingers like sand. He thought about the way she'd looked at him, unflinching, her eyes not filled with the usual awe that people like him received, but with a quiet strength, a respect perhaps, but no reverence. In his world, people were supposed to revere him, not challenge him. The following week, Marta found herself walking past the same corner bistro where the dinner had taken place. She had almost forgotten about Philip Stan's arrogance until she saw him again. This time, he wasn't surrounded by business associates. He was sitting alone at a small table, sipping a glass of wine, his eyes scanning the menu as if it held the answers to all of his problems. Marta's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to run into him so soon, but there he was, seated at the same corner table, looking every bit the businessman he was, yet somehow more vulnerable than she remembered. He hadn't noticed her yet. His eyes remained fixed on the menu, his expression unreadable. Without thinking, Marta walked past him, but as she did, their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke, and the silence between them seemed to stretch, thick with unspoken words. "Miss Felix," Philip said finally, his voice more composed than it had been during their dinner. "I didn't expect to see you here." Marta paused, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. "It's my job," she replied flatly, keeping her tone neutral. "I work here." Philip's lips twitched at the corners, almost like a smile, but it quickly faded. "Right," he said. "I was hoping we could talk more about what you said that night." Marta hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to revisit that conversation, but something in his tone, the slightest trace of humility, made her pause. He wasn't asking for an apology. He wasn't even trying to dismiss her anymore. The shift in his approach caught her off guard. "I didn't think you'd care to hear more," Marta said, her voice guarded. "You seemed content with your own answers that night." Philip leaned back slightly, the chair creaking under his weight. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words coming out with surprising ease. "I'm interested in hearing more." They found a quiet corner of the bistro, away from the main dining area, and sat down. Marta wasn't sure why she had agreed to this. It was unprofessional, really. She had already proven her point. But something in Philip's demeanor intrigued her. An odd mixture of arrogance and vulnerability, of confidence that now seemed fragile. "Look," Philip began, once they were seated. "I'm not used to being challenged like that. I've built everything from the ground up, and I don't take failure lightly. But what you said, it got under my skin, and I can't ignore it." Marta didn't respond right away. She had no intention of indulging him in a pity party. Instead, she took a deep breath and spoke matter-of-factly. "You're right to be concerned. You've made a lot of decisions based on your gut, but your gut's been wrong. You need to adapt. The market is changing, and you're stuck in the past." Philip's brow furrowed. "So what? You think I'm failing?" Marta shook her head. "Not failing, just blind to the risks. You've been so focused on expansion and growth that you've overlooked the fundamentals. Your portfolio is top-heavy. There's a reason you've had multiple failures this quarter." For a moment, Philip was silent, absorbing her words. "How do you know all this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more genuine than it had been before. Marta paused, staring at him. "Because I've spent my life studying these things. My PhD isn't just some title. It's what I've dedicated my life to. I understand how markets work, and how people, like you, often ignore the signs when their egos are too involved." Philip's eyes narrowed, but there was no defensiveness in his gaze now, just curiosity. "And you think I've ignored the signs?" "Yes," Marta said simply. "But you're not too far gone. It's not too late to fix things, but you'll have to listen and adapt." The conversation continued for another hour, with Marta breaking down the key areas where Philip's business needed improvement. Philip listened intently, asking questions, probing deeper into the ideas she was presenting. By the time the conversation came to a close, it was clear that something had changed, not just in him, but in her as well. As they stood to leave, Philip turned to her. "You were right. I've been too focused on my own success to see the bigger picture. You've given me a lot to think about." Marta nodded, her heart racing slightly at the unexpected sincerity in his voice. "That's all I've ever wanted," she said, "for you to see things differently. Not because of me, but because it's the right thing to do for your company." Philip extended his hand. "I'd like to offer you something more than just advice, Marta. I think you could be an asset to my team. I'm starting a new project, and I could use someone with your expertise." Marta's eyes widened slightly. This was unexpected. She had been prepared to walk away from this encounter, but now, faced with an opportunity that could change everything, she hesitated. "I'll think about it," she replied, her voice steady. But in her mind, 1,000 thoughts raced. What did this mean? Was she willing to step into his world of power and wealth? Or would she remain in the world she knew, one that had already humbled her? As they parted ways, Marta couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation, this meeting, had changed the course of her life. In the weeks that followed, Marta and Philip found themselves caught in an unexpected dance. What had started as a confrontation had evolved into something more complex, something neither of them had anticipated. Their interactions, though still charged with tension, became quieter, more deliberate. Marta continued to work at the bistro, and Philip, despite his initial resistance, began seeking her out more often. He didn't know what it was about her that drew him in. Was it her intellect, her calm demeanor, or the way she had looked at him with no fear in her eyes? Whatever it was, Philip couldn't deny that he found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. One afternoon he walked into the bistro with his usual swagger, but this time his eyes immediately sought her out. Marta, standing behind the counter, didn't acknowledge him right away. She was busy, her focus entirely on her tasks, but the moment their eyes met, a current of recognition passed between them. Philip was the first to break the silence. "Busy day?" he asked, his voice low and casual, though there was an undercurrent of something more beneath it. Marta glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "It's always busy," she replied, but there was a hint of something softer in her tone. "Isn't that what you businessmen live for? The rush?" Philip smirked, stepping closer. "Some of us do. But not everything is about the rush, Marta. Some things require patience." His words hung in the air, and Marta's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't talking about business anymore. She knew it, and she could see it in his eyes. There was an unspoken invitation in his gaze, something more than just casual conversation. Their meetings became more frequent, though they remained subtle. A passing comment here, a shared laugh there. Philip still found himself fascinated by Marta's intellect, but it was the moments when they weren't talking about business that intrigued him the most. One evening, after a long day, Philip stayed after the others had left, lingering in the bistro. He had come to admire how Marta carried herself, her quiet strength and grace. But what struck him the most was the way she saw through him, through the layers of arrogance he had spent years cultivating. He watched as she set down a tray of empty glasses, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Her back was straight, her expression focused. She was a woman who had given up nothing in the face of hardship, someone who had fought for everything she had. Philip leaned in slightly. "You're not like the others," he said softly, though there was no mockery in his voice now, only curiosity. Marta didn't look up immediately. "I'm sure that's exactly what you tell everyone," she replied, a touch of sarcasm in her voice. But there was a warmth behind her words, a hint of vulnerability that Philip couldn't ignore. "I mean it," he said, his voice more earnest now. "You don't let people define you. Not even me." She finally turned to face him, her eyes locking with his. "And that's something you don't understand, is it?" Philip hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Maybe not. Maybe I've spent too long defining everything around me. But you're different." Marta let out a soft, almost imperceptible laugh. "I don't need your approval, Philip. I've been fine without it." For a moment, the air between them thickened with something unsaid. It wasn't just challenge anymore. It was something deeper, something they were both afraid to confront. The next time they met, Philip was unusually quiet. He had been reflecting on their previous conversation, thinking about Marta's strength and the way she had looked at him, unaffected by his wealth or status. She had the ability to cut through his bravado, to see him for who he really was, and that terrified him. It wasn't often that Philip felt vulnerable, but with Marta, he couldn't hide behind his wealth or his power. He found himself wondering what she saw when she looked at him. Did she see just another arrogant billionaire, or was there something more beneath the surface? As he sat down at the bar, Marta approached, this time with a slight smile on her lips. "You're unusually quiet today," she remarked, setting down his drink. Philip looked up at her, the usual walls he put up around himself momentarily lowered. "Just thinking," he said, his tone softer than usual. "About how wrong I've been." Marta raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Wrong? About what?" He took a deep breath. "About people. About the way I've treated them. I've spent so much time believing that I was superior, that I could control everything around me. But with you, I've realized I don't have all the answers." Marta's gaze softened, though she kept her voice steady. "That's a good start, Philip. Admitting you don't have all the answers is the first step in understanding that you don't have to control everything, especially people." Philip nodded, his eyes meeting hers. For a brief moment, They were no longer two people on opposite ends of a power struggle. They were just two people, sitting in a quiet bar, acknowledging the cracks in the facades they had built around themselves. "Maybe I've been chasing the wrong things all this time," he murmured. Marta didn't respond immediately. She simply gave him a quiet, understanding look. She knew better than anyone that it wasn't about the money or the power. It was about something much more intangible. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between them continued to build. Quiet, unspoken, but ever present. Philip's visits to the bistro became more frequent, and with each one, their conversations grew longer, more personal. It was clear that neither of them could ignore the magnetic pull between them, even if they both tried. One evening, as the bistro started to wind down for the night, Marta found herself alone with Philip once again. The others had left, and the place was nearly empty. There was no one else to observe them, no one to witness the delicate shift in their relationship. Philip stood by the counter, his expression unreadable as he stared at the glass in his hand. Marta leaned against the bar, watching him, unsure of what to say. "Why don't you just ask me?" she said, breaking the silence. Philip glanced up, his eyes meeting hers. "Ask you what?" "Ask me what's really going on between us," she replied, her voice steady but full of emotion. "We both know it's not just about business anymore." He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "Maybe I'm afraid of what the answer might be." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they both understood that once the question was asked, there would be no going back. But neither of them could deny the undeniable truth that lingered between them. There was something powerful, something raw, that neither could escape. And in that quiet moment, they both realized that the connection they shared wasn't just a battle of egos. It was something deeper, something neither of them could fully comprehend, but both of them were afraid to ignore. A week after their last interaction, Philip did something Marta hadn't expected. He invited her to dinner. But not in the usual way. There was no elaborate setting, no lavish restaurant, just an invitation to a private dining room at one of his offices. It was strange, considering how much he had guarded his personal life up until now. But Marta, ever the observer, couldn't ignore the subtle shift in his demeanor. "Why this?" she had asked, standing in the doorway of the private dining room, her arms crossed as she surveyed the room. Philip, seated at the long oak table, looked up with a faint, almost self-deprecating smile. "Because we need to talk, Marta. Not about business, not about portfolios. Just about us." Marta hesitated. She had grown accustomed to avoiding personal conversations with him. Her life had been about self-reliance, and now, standing before him, she couldn't help but wonder what this was really about. Why now? Why this sudden shift in their dynamic? Still, she stepped inside. "I'm listening," she said, her voice steady. Philip gestured to the seat across from him. "Please, sit. I don't want you thinking this is some power move. I've been thinking about everything you said." Marta's eyebrow arched, her skepticism evident. "And what exactly have you been thinking?" "About you," he said, the words catching in his throat. "About what you said that night. About how I've been living in a world that doesn't see people. They're just tools to further my agenda." Marta took a deep breath. He was acknowledging something she never thought he would. But was this a true shift, or just another manipulation disguised as self-reflection? As they sat across from one another, the air between them thickened with unspoken words. Philip's gaze was softer now, but Marta didn't trust it completely. She had seen men like him before, ones who used charm and vulnerability as a mask for control. "You've been hiding behind your power, Philip," Marta said, breaking the silence. "You've built this empire by thinking you can control everything around you. And yes, you're right. Your business strategies are flawed, but that's not the worst part." Philip's eyes darkened slightly, his jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" "The worst part," she continued, "is that you think your wealth can buy everything. It's not just business. It's how you treat people. It's how you dismiss anyone who doesn't fit your narrow view of success." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You don't know anything about me," he snapped, his voice low but full of an edge she hadn't heard before. Marta stood her ground. I know enough. I know you use your power as a shield, a weapon. You hide behind your success to avoid real emotions. But in the end, it's the people around you who suffer. For a moment, Philip looked like he might argue further. But then, as if realizing the truth in her words, he let out a long breath and sank back into his chair. The defiance in his posture was gone, replaced by something quieter, regret. "I didn't ask for any of this," he muttered. "I never asked to be this person." Marta studied him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes for the first time. "I didn't ask for it either, Philip. But we both are who we are because of the choices we've made." There was no more anger between them. Only a quiet, undeniable understanding that had begun to form in the silence. The silence lingered between them, heavy and thick with the weight of their words. Philip's posture had softened. The arrogance, so familiar to Marta in their previous interactions, had faded, leaving behind a man who seemed almost lost. "I've spent so long convincing myself that this world was mine to control," Philip said quietly, almost to himself. "I pushed everyone away, Marta. I didn't want anyone getting too close because if they did, I knew I'd have to face the truth about myself, about my fears." Marta didn't speak right away. She wasn't sure how to respond. She had seen many people hide their insecurities behind bravado, but hearing it from someone like Philip was different. It made her feel something she hadn't anticipated: empathy. She leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not going to make excuses for you, Philip. You've hurt people, including yourself. But the first step is facing it, facing who you've become, and what you're willing to change." Philip let out a long, shaky breath, his gaze falling to the table. "I don't know if I can change. I don't know if it's even possible at this point." Marta shook her head. "It's never too late, but it has to be your choice. You have to want to change, not just for the people around you, but for yourself. That's the only way it'll be real." Philip lifted his eyes to meet hers, his expression vulnerable. "And what about you, Marta? What do you want?" Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected the question. She had spent so much time focusing on him, on trying to make him see the truth, that she hadn't given much thought to what she wanted from all this. "I want honesty," Marta said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. "I want someone who sees me for who I really am. Not just a waitress, but someone with a future. Someone who can stand beside me, not try to control me." Philip's gaze softened as he nodded slowly. "I'm sorry for everything I've done. I want to try. For you. For us." The moment hung in the air, charged with emotions that neither of them had anticipated. The truth had been laid bare, raw and unvarnished. Neither of them knew what would come next, but for the first time, it felt like they were standing on the same ground. Marta looked at him, her heart racing. It wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't about the wealth or the power that he held. It was about something far simpler: connection. It was about trust. Philip seemed to sense it too. The tension that had once defined their interactions was now replaced with a quiet understanding, one that neither of them could ignore. The attraction between them was undeniable, but it wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was intellectual. It was real. "I don't know where this goes, Marta," Philip said softly, his voice almost vulnerable. "But I want to find out. I want to see what we can build together, without the power games, without the pretense." Marta's eyes softened, her own fears slowly dissipating. "I don't have all the answers either, but I'm willing to find out too." And in that moment, both of them understood. They weren't just two people who had clashed in a restaurant anymore. They were two people who, despite their differences, had found something worth fighting for: each other. The following week, Philip's offer hung in the air between them like an unspoken promise. He had asked Marta to consult for his company, something he had never done for anyone before. His empire, which had been built on ambition and ego, now seemed to be teetering on the edge. Philip knew that if he didn't change his approach, he would lose everything he had worked for. And yet, there was a part of him that knew this wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about Marta too. She had seen him for who he truly was, something no one else had ever done. Her insight had struck a nerve, but now he was beginning to wonder if he could actually trust her. and if he could trust himself enough to let her in. Marta, for her part, was hesitant. She had already proven herself. She had shown him the cracks in his business, but more importantly, she had revealed something to him that he hadn't realized he was missing: genuine connection. But now she stood at a crossroads. She had a choice to make: accept the opportunity and risk her professional integrity in a world that had once rejected her, or walk away and continue living life on her own terms. As she sat in her apartment later that night, her thoughts were a blur. Was she truly ready to step into his world? The world of power, wealth, and corporate drama? Or had she finally found the courage to stand outside it and carve her own path? Marta's decision wasn't just about the job offer. It was about everything that had led her to this moment. She thought about her time in academia, how she had been so close to changing the world with her research, only for everything to be taken from her. She had fought so hard to stand on her own, to prove that she didn't need anyone's validation. And yet, here was Philip, a man whose world she had always seen as out of reach, offering her a chance to re-enter a sphere she had once longed for. But what did that really mean for her? Would she be sacrificing her authenticity? Would she fall into the same trap as so many others, letting wealth and success define who she was? She knew she had to be careful. Philip's world wasn't one that could be easily navigated. It was a world of ego and power, a world that had consumed him. Marta had always prided herself on being strong, independent. She wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Philip, dictate her worth. And yet, something about the possibility of working alongside him, of using her knowledge to help him fix his mistakes, intrigued her. She had always been driven by a desire to fix what was broken, whether it was in economics or in people. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Philip. "I've been thinking about our conversation. I think you're exactly what my company needs. Think about the offer. No pressure." Marta stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was she willing to let herself be vulnerable? To trust someone who had once seen her as nothing more than a servant in his world? The next morning, Marta stood before her mirror, staring at her reflection. Her decision was still uncertain, but something inside her had shifted. She had spent years trying to prove herself to the world, and now, for the first time, she wasn't just proving her worth to anyone else, she was proving it to herself. She didn't need to take Philip's offer. She didn't need to prove that she was more than just a waitress. But she also knew that the chance to do something real, to change the course of his company and perhaps even his life, was too important to ignore. Marta pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with purpose as she typed her response to Philip. "I'll accept your offer, but we're going to do this my way. No power games, no ego, just the facts." As soon as she hit send, a wave of both excitement and fear washed over her. She had taken the plunge. She wasn't just stepping into his world, she was taking control of it. Philip's response was almost immediate. "I'm glad you've decided to join us. Let's start fixing things." Together, Marta placed the phone down and looked at herself in the mirror one last time. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that bistro weeks ago. She had found something inside herself she hadn't realized was there, the strength to change, to stand up for what she believed in, no matter the cost. As Marta walked into Philip's office for the first time as his consultant, the weight of her decision finally settled in. The world she was stepping into was foreign to her. The polished floors, the sleek glass windows that looked out over the city, it all felt so different from the world of academia she had once inhabited. Philip was already at his desk when she entered, his back to her as he stared at the view outside. She took a deep breath before walking over to his desk. He turned when he heard her approach, and for a moment, there was something different in his eyes, a mix of respect and something deeper. "You made the right choice," he said softly, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. Marta nodded, her nerves slowly fading. "Let's get to work." They sat down at the conference table, and for the first time, they were partners in something bigger than themselves. Philip had always been used to doing things his way, but now he was listening. Marta, with her sharp intellect and unshakable confidence, was taking the reins. They began to outline the first steps to address his company's flaws, and for the first time, Philip realized that his empire needed more than just expansion. It needed foundation. It needed insight. It needed someone who wasn't blinded by power or ego, someone like Marta. As the hours passed, Marta's initial hesitation melted away. She wasn't here to play the game. She was here to change the game. And for the first time, Philip Stan was willing to let her. Marta's first few weeks working with Philip were a whirlwind of strategy meetings, late nights, and relentless number crunching. She dove into the depths of his company, analyzing his portfolio, studying his acquisitions, and identifying the weaknesses that had been ignored for far too long. But with each step forward, she felt the tension between them growing. Philip's ego had not disappeared entirely. While he listened to her ideas and respected her intellect, he struggled to relinquish control. This was his world, his empire, and Marta's presence was a constant reminder that the way he had been running things wasn't working. One morning, after an intense meeting with his board members, Philip pulled Marta aside into his private office. The look in his eyes was sharp, his expression hard. "I'm not sure I agree with everything you proposed today," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You're asking for a shift in the company's direction that could cost us millions. Are you sure about this?" Marta met his gaze, her posture straight and confident. She had spent years honing her ability to read people, to understand their motivations. And Philip, though brilliant, had one glaring flaw: his need for dominance. "If we keep doing things the way you have been, we'll lose far more than that," she replied, her voice steady. "You need to make changes, Philip, radical ones. But you won't be able to do it alone. I'm not asking you to give up control. I'm asking you to share it." Philip's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak for a long moment. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You really think I can't do it alone?" "I think you've been doing it alone for too long," Marta said. "And look where it's gotten you." For a moment, Philip stared at her, his gaze intense. Then, finally, he nodded. "Fine. I'll give your plan a shot." Marta's proposal wasn't an easy sell. The board members who had been with Philip for years weren't willing to give up their long-standing strategies without a fight. They pushed back at every turn, questioning Marta's methods and dismissing her ideas as too risky. It was the first real test of their professional relationship. Philip, though still guarded, found himself caught between his loyalty to his team and his growing respect for Marta's intellect. It was a struggle to balance the two. On one hand, he needed to preserve his power, but on the other, he knew that Marta's perspective could reshape the future of his company. The board meetings became a battleground. Marta and the longtime associates clashed in heated debates, their ideas flying back and forth like weapons. But through it all, Philip noticed something shifting. Marta's resolve was unshakable. She didn't back down, didn't apologize for challenging their established norms. She pushed and prodded, forcing them to confront the harsh realities they had been ignoring. By the end of the week, the board had reluctantly agreed to a trial run of Marta's proposal, though they were less than enthusiastic. As the meeting concluded, Philip stood up, his eyes meeting Marta's across the room. "You did it," he said quietly, a trace of admiration in his voice. Marta simply nodded, her gaze unwavering. "It's only the beginning." As the weeks passed, the initial tension between Marta and Philip began to ebb away, replaced by something else: respect. Philip, who had once seen Marta as nothing more than a challenge to his authority, began to realize that her intellect and insight were invaluable. She wasn't just a consultant, she was someone who had the ability to see beyond the surface, to cut through the layers of corporate jargon and find the truth hidden beneath. Philip watched as the company slowly began to shift, the changes starting to take root. The projects that once seemed doomed to fail now showed signs of promise. The market was responding, and Philip's confidence grew, albeit with a reluctant acknowledgement that it was Marta's strategies that had made the difference. One evening, as they worked late into the night, Philip leaned back in his chair, his eyes on Marta as she reviewed a report. "I've never met anyone like you," he said, his voice soft but genuine. "You don't let me get away with anything." Marta glanced up from her papers, her eyes meeting his. "I don't have time to let you make the same mistakes. The world doesn't wait." Philip smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I've noticed." The conversation lingered between them for a moment, before Marta returned her attention to the report in front of her. But for Philip, it was a turning point. He had always believed in his own abilities, in his ability to control every situation. But with Marta, he was learning to let go of that need for control. He was learning that it was okay to trust someone else, to allow someone else to challenge him, and in turn help him grow. Their professional relationship continued to evolve, but something else was happening, something neither of them had anticipated. The connection between them, which had started with friction and intellectual conflict, had transformed into something more personal, more intimate. There were moments, quiet moments, when they would exchange a glance across the conference room or share a knowing smile in the midst of a heated debate. Philip, who had once prided himself on his emotional detachment, now found himself inexplicably drawn to Marta. It wasn't just her intellect anymore. It was the way she carried herself, the way she moved through the world with grace and dignity despite everything life had thrown at her. Marta, too, found herself conflicted. She had always kept her emotions in check, never letting anyone get too close. She had built walls around herself, walls that had protected her from the disappointments and heartaches of the past. But Philip had a way of breaking through those walls piece by piece, and the more she saw of him, the more she wondered if he was someone she could trust. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they found themselves alone in the conference room, the city lights flickering outside the windows. Philip poured them both a drink, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something more vulnerable. "I never thought I'd be here," he said quietly, his gaze distant. "Not like this, not with you." Marta looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And how do you feel about that?" "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I think I'm starting to understand why you've stuck around." Marta's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she saw Philip not as a businessman, but as a man who was as vulnerable as anyone else. In that moment, they were no longer two people locked in a power struggle. They were two people who had found a connection that neither could deny. Philip's empire had started to show signs of recovery, thanks in large part to Marta's strategies. Yet, despite the progress, there was an underlying tension between them. As the weeks went by, they both found themselves at a crossroads. What had begun as a professional relationship was now teetering dangerously close to something more personal. Neither of them was ready to acknowledge it, but it was there, simmering beneath the surface. The tipping point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, during a routine meeting, Philip made a decision without consulting Marta first. It was a small decision in the grand scheme of things, but it was one that undermined everything Marta had worked so hard to implement. It felt like a betrayal, a sign that he was still clinging to his old ways, still unwilling to fully trust her expertise. Marta's pulse quickened as she sat across from him, trying to mask her frustration. She had given him the benefit of the doubt, but this time it was different. She had trusted him to change, to truly embrace the partnership they had started to build. But this move felt like a step backward. "Philip," she said, her voice steady but tinged with anger, "why didn't you consult me before making that decision? You've just undone weeks of work with one move." Philip, sensing the shift in the air, met her gaze with a defensive look. "I didn't think it would be a big deal, Marta. You've been too focused on the details, and I felt like it was time to take action." "That's not how this works," she shot back, her frustration rising. "You can't just make decisions without considering the bigger picture. I've been guiding you for a reason. If you're going to dismiss my input, then what's the point of this partnership?" The words were out before she could stop them, and as soon as they left her mouth, Marta regretted them. She had allowed herself to be caught up in the heat of the moment, letting the anger blind her judgment. Philip's face hardened, and for a brief moment, the air between them felt suffocating. "You think I don't know what I'm doing?" he replied, his voice cold. Marta's heart sank as she realized what this argument had become. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about something deeper. They were no longer just two professionals trying to make a company thrive. They were two people who had invested something personal into this, and now that was threatening to unravel everything they had worked for. The argument that had started in the boardroom continued long into the evening. Marta's emotions were still raw, her frustration lingering like a heavy fog. She knew she had let her guard down, but she wasn't going to apologize. This wasn't just about a bad business decision. It was about trust. Philip had promised to listen to her, to work together. Yet time and time again, he had dismissed her expertise, assuming he knew better. Later that night, Marta found herself walking to the rooftop of the office building, needing a moment to clear her head. The city lights stretched out before her like a vast sea, but even the beauty of the view couldn't calm her thoughts. Philip followed her, his footsteps quiet as he approached. When he reached her, he didn't say anything at first. He simply stood beside her, his presence like an unspoken apology. "I didn't mean to dismiss you earlier," Philip said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. "I've been under a lot of pressure, and I acted out of instinct." Marta didn't respond immediately. She was still processing the argument, still angry, but there was something in the way Philip stood there, looking at her with genuine remorse, that made her pause. She knew that the ego-driven man who had walked into her life months ago was starting to fade, replaced by someone who was actually willing to listen. "You don't get to throw away my work because you think you can handle it," she said finally, her voice softer now. "We're supposed to be in this together, not on opposing sides." "I know," Philip admitted, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "I don't want to fight with you, Marta. I don't want to lose what we've built." The honesty in his words made her heart ache, but it also opened the door for something else, something she had been avoiding for too long. Trust. The kind of trust that wasn't just about business, but about vulnerability, about letting go of the walls they had both built around themselves. "You have to trust me too," Marta said, her voice low but firm. "You can't keep making decisions for both of us. I'm not asking for control, but I need you to respect the work I've put into this." Philip nodded slowly, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "I respect you, Marta, more than I've respected anyone." For the first time in what felt like ages, the tension between them began to melt. They didn't need to speak any more words. The unspoken understanding was enough. They were in this together. Despite their conversation on the rooftop, the distance between them persisted. Philip continued to navigate the world of business with his usual intensity, but the cracks in his armor were now more visible than ever. He couldn't shake the feeling that Marta was slowly pulling away from him, and it was a feeling he wasn't used to. Marta, for her part, had withdrawn into herself, focusing on the work that needed to be done. The tension between them had shifted, but now there was something more subtle at play, something that made her hesitant to get too close. She had seen the cracks in Philip's persona, and now she wasn't sure how to reconcile them with the man who had challenged her in so many ways. Philip sensed her distance, but he didn't know how to bridge the gap. He was used to being the one who held the reins, who made the decisions, but with Marta, everything had changed. And he wasn't sure he could handle that change. Their professional interactions continued, and they worked together as they always had, efficiently, effectively, but something had shifted. The raw vulnerability they had shared on the rooftop felt like a distant memory. Philip wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, but he couldn't find the right words. The silence between them grew louder with each passing day. Marta, too, struggled. She had started to wonder if she was making a mistake, if getting involved with someone like Philip would only end in heartbreak. She had always been fiercely independent, and now she found herself questioning whether she was losing herself in the process. Weeks passed, and the tension between Marta and Philip only grew more complicated. But one evening, as they sat across from one another in the conference room, the weight of everything finally came to a head. Philip set down the file he had been reviewing, his eyes meeting Marta's across the table. For the first time in weeks, there was no business to discuss, no strategies to debate, just the two of them, caught in the silence that had defined their recent interactions. "Marta," he said, his voice breaking the quiet, "I don't want to do this anymore. Not like this. I don't want to hide behind my business. I don't want to hide behind anything anymore." Marta's heart raced as she looked at him, unsure of what he meant. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm tired of pretending I don't care," Philip continued, his voice softer now. "Tired of pretending I can do this alone. I need you, more than just in business, more than just as a colleague. I need you in my life, in every way." Marta felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. In that moment, she realized that she too needed something more. She needed connection. She needed honesty. And maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to trust again. With a deep breath, she looked at him. "I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, they both knew that they had finally found what they had been searching for. Something real, something true. The days after Marta and Philip's conversation on the rooftop were filled with uncertainty. Though they had both made a step toward reconciling their differences, the unspoken tension between them still lingered. Philip couldn't shake the feeling that he had somehow let Marta down, even after everything they had been through together. It wasn't until a few days later that he found the courage to truly apologize. Marta had just finished a long day at the office when she arrived at the restaurant for her shift. As she stepped inside, she was surprised to see Philip sitting at the corner table, his usual arrogance replaced by a quieter, more contemplative demeanor. He stood when she entered, his eyes locking onto hers. "Hey," he said softly, his voice more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about, and I owe you an apology." Marta froze, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected him to come to her like this, so open, so unguarded. She had gotten used to the version of him who was always in control, always calculating. But now, she saw a side of him that she hadn't noticed before. The side that, despite everything, was trying to make amends. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Marta," Philip continued, taking a step closer. "I've been too focused on my own ego, my own power, and I haven't listened to you the way I should have. I treated you like you were just part of the scenery, and that's not fair to you. You deserve better." Marta's heart softened at his words, and for a moment she couldn't find the right words to respond. She had been hurt by him, yes, but hearing him say it, hearing him admit his faults, was a step she hadn't expected. "I don't want to be someone who makes you feel small, Marta," he added, his eyes sincere. "I want to be someone who values you, who values everything you bring to this partnership." Marta finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm not here to be your second choice, Philip. I'm here because I believe in what we're building together. But I won't let you walk all over me again." Philip nodded, understanding her words completely. "I know, and I don't want to do that again. I need you to know how sorry I am." Marta had always been cautious about trust. She had spent her entire life relying on her own intellect and resilience, never depending on anyone else to guide her through tough times. She had been betrayed too many times in the past to let her guard down easily, especially when it came to someone like Philip, someone who had initially seen her as nothing more than a waitress. But in that moment, as she stood before him, she realized that trust was never something that came easily. It was something that was earned, something that had to be built brick by brick. And Philip had begun to show her that he was willing to put in the effort. "I'm still not sure if I can fully trust you," Marta admitted, her voice steady but filled with vulnerability. "But I want to try. I want to believe that we can build something more than just business. Something real." Philip stepped closer, his expression serious. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn that trust, Marta. I know it won't be easy, but I'm ready for the challenge." Marta took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling. It wasn't easy to let someone in after everything she had been through, but she realized that if she kept building walls around herself, she would never experience what it meant to truly connect with someone. Maybe, just maybe, she could take a chance on Philip. "I'm in," she said finally, meeting his gaze with a quiet intensity. "But you have to understand, I won't settle for anything less than honesty, Philip. If you're going to be a part of my life, it has to be real." Philip smiled, the weight of his own guilt and uncertainty lifting slightly. "I promise you, Marta, this will be real. I'm not walking away from this." With the personal reconciliation behind them, Marta and Philip's focus shifted back to the business. Marta's strategies had started to take root in the company, and the early results were promising. The board members who had once been skeptical of her methods were beginning to see the value in her approach. More importantly, Philip had started to trust her judgment in ways he had never done with anyone else. One afternoon, during a critical meeting with a major client, Marta was tasked with leading the discussion. She had done her homework, prepared her presentation, and carefully analyze the client's needs. But as she stood in front of the room, with Philip and the others watching her, the weight of the situation didn't faze her. She was in control. "Gentlemen, this is where we are," Marta began, her voice steady and confident. "We have a unique opportunity to partner with this client, but we need to address a few key areas before we proceed." Philip watched as Marta took charge of the meeting, guiding the conversation with authority and expertise. For the first time, he truly saw her as a leader, someone who wasn't just filling a role but was integral to the success of the company. As the meeting concluded, the client expressed interest in moving forward with the partnership. Marta's strategy had worked, and it was a major win for both her and the company. After the meeting, Philip pulled her aside, his face filled with pride. "That was impressive, Marta. You've earned my trust, and the company's respect." Marta's heart swelled with a quiet pride. "It's not about earning trust anymore, Philip," she said with a smile. "It's about proving what we can accomplish together." The weeks that followed their breakthrough were filled with new opportunities and challenges. But something had shifted, something deeper than just their professional partnership. The more time they spent together, the more their connection grew. It was no longer just about business, it was about building something more personal. One evening, after a particularly successful presentation to investors, Philip found himself standing beside Marta on the rooftop of the office building again. The city lights stretched out in front of them, and for once, there was no business to discuss, no strategies to implement. "I've been thinking about everything," Philip said, his voice quieter than usual. "And I'm starting to see it, Marta. You were right. It's not just about ambition or vision, it's about trusting the right people. And you've proven yourself to me in more ways than one." Marta glanced at him, her heart beating a little faster. "You've come a long way, Philip. I'm proud of you." He looked at her, a soft smile on his lips. "I couldn't have done it without you, and I don't think I could have done it alone." For a moment, there was only silence between them. The tension that had once defined their relationship had dissipated, replaced by something simpler: understanding, respect, and something more than just a professional connection. "I think we're ready for the next step," Marta said quietly, her gaze meeting his. Philip nodded. Together, and as the night sky enveloped them, they both knew that they had reached a turning point, one where trust, vulnerability, and partnership would carry them into whatever came next. It had been months since Marta had stepped into Philip's world, and the changes were undeniable. The company was thriving, and with every success, Marta's influence grew stronger. She had earned her place, not just as a consultant, but as a key player in Philip's empire. But even more important than the professional victories was the shift in their personal connection. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet of Philip's office, Marta looked at the man who had once been her greatest challenge. The arrogance had faded, replaced by someone who understood the value of collaboration, of listening, of learning. "We've come a long way," Marta said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Philip smiled, his gaze fixed on the paperwork in front of him. "We have, and we're just getting started." But even as the company continued to grow, Marta knew there was something else she had to address. The same question that had been lingering in the back of her mind for weeks: where did she and Philip stand? They had worked side by side, trusted each other in ways they never thought possible. But what did that mean for their future? She glanced up at him, meeting his eyes. "Philip, what happens now? We've achieved so much, but where do we go from here?" Philip leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "I don't know, but I do know one thing. I don't want to do it without you." Marta's heart fluttered at his words, but she couldn't ignore the lingering doubts. Was she ready to take the next step? Was she ready to build something with him beyond business? The question Marta had been avoiding was now at the forefront of her mind. She had never been one to rush into things, especially when it came to matters of the heart. But with Philip, it was different. The walls she had carefully built around herself had slowly started to crumble, and now, standing in front of him, she felt the weight of the decision that lay ahead. Later that night, after the office had quieted down, Marta found herself alone with Philip again. This time, there were no spreadsheets, no board meetings, no clients. It was just the two of them, caught in a rare moment of stillness. Marta took a deep breath, gathering the courage to ask the question that had been plaguing her. "Philip, where are we going with this? I need to know. Because I can't keep pretending that it's just business between us." Philip met her gaze without hesitation. "Marta, I don't want to pretend anymore. I've been holding back for so long, and I realize now that it's because I was scared. Scared of what this could mean. Scared of letting myself feel something real." Marta's heart softened at his words, but she was still cautious. "I can't be just another business partner, Philip. I can't be something you keep on the side, something you don't fully invest in. I need to know that this, us, means something more." There was a moment of silence between them as Philip processed her words. Finally he spoke, his voice filled with sincerity. "Marta, I'm all in. This isn't just about business for me anymore. It's about you, about us. I've never felt like this before." Marta felt a weight lift off her shoulders, but the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. She knew they would face challenges, that their personal and professional lives would often collide. But in that moment, she made a choice. She was ready to let herself feel something real. "I believe you," she said softly, "and I want to take that step with you." From that moment on, things shifted between Marta and Philip. They had been walking a fine line for so long, balancing their personal and professional lives, but now they had crossed into something new, something neither of them had anticipated when they first met. The transition wasn't without its challenges, of course. The line between business and personal was often blurred, and the pressures of running a company together tested their relationship in ways they hadn't imagined. But what had once been an intense, sometimes combative dynamic was now built on mutual respect and shared goals. They began to trust each other in ways they hadn't before. Marta's ideas were no longer met with skepticism, and Philip started to let go of the control he had once clung to so fiercely. Instead, they became partners, not just in business, but in life. One evening, after another successful meeting with investors, they stood on the balcony of the office building, overlooking the city below. The stars above seemed to mirror the possibilities ahead of them. "You know," Philip said, his voice low, "I didn't think I could ever work with someone as closely as I've worked with you. But here we are." Marta smiled, leaning against the railing. "It's because we trust each other now. We're no longer just fighting for our own success. We're fighting for something bigger." Philip turned to face her, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "And I don't want to fight for anything else, Marta. You've changed everything for me. You've made me see that there's more to life than just winning." She met his eyes, her heart full. "I don't want to fight either. I just want to build something real. With you." The night air felt warmer now, their shared connection palpable in the stillness. For the first time, Marta didn't have to question what the future held. She knew that, whatever came next, they would face it together. A few months later, Marta stood at the edge of a new chapter in her life. The company was flourishing, and their professional relationship had blossomed into something more. What had started as a power struggle had evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and a deep emotional connection. One afternoon, as they finalized another major business deal, Philip turned to Marta, his expression serious yet filled with anticipation. "Marta, I've been thinking a lot about where we go from here. I don't want to just be partners in business. I want to be partners in life. I want us to build something real, something lasting." Marta looked at him, her heart racing. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, it felt like the culmination of everything they had worked for. "I think we've already started building that, Philip," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "But I'm ready. I'm ready for whatever comes next." Philip stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Then let's take that step together." As they stood there, hand in hand, Marta realized that they had both changed. They had both grown into something new, something more, something stronger. Their journey together wasn't just about business. It was about love, trust, and the willingness to take a chance on each other. And in that moment, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The world had changed for both Marta and Philip. What had once been a battle for dominance had transformed into a partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and trust. Marta had proven herself, not just as a consultant, but as a force within Philip's company, and in his life. They had rebuilt the company together, but more importantly, they had rebuilt their connection, one that neither of them had anticipated but both had grown to cherish. As the company expanded, Marta and Philip found themselves not only navigating the business world, but also their evolving relationship. Their professional success was undeniable, but it was the quiet moments between them that defined their bond. The shared glances across the conference room, the late-night talks about life, the dreams they now talked about building together. One evening, as they stood in the office overlooking the city, Marta couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in all they had accomplished. The city lights below reflected the promise of the future, a future they were building together, side by side. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Marta asked, her voice filled with wonder. Philip smiled softly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Every day. But I think the best part is realizing we're just getting started." They stood there in silence for a moment, both of them looking out at the horizon. Marta had never imagined that she would find herself in a place like this, not just professionally, but personally. And yet, here she was, with the man who had once been her greatest challenge, and now, her greatest partner. Life had a funny way of leading you exactly where you needed to go. Marta had learned that lesson over and over again. The twists and turns of her journey, her abandonment of academia, her time as a waitress, and now, the life she had built with Philip, had all shaped her into the woman she was today. She wasn't the same woman who had first walked into that bistro, uncertain and unsure of where her future would lead. She was stronger, more confident, and ready to face whatever came next. "Where do you see us in 5 years?" Marta asked one evening as they sat together, their fingers intertwined. Philip glanced at her, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "I see us still building, still growing, and not just in business, in everything." Marta nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "That's what I want too. To keep growing, keep learning, and to do it with you." The simplicity of the moment felt profound. They had both come so far, so much further than either had expected, but it was the depth of their bond that made it all worthwhile. They had learned the hard way that life wasn't just about success or wealth. It was about the connections you built, the people you trusted, and the love you allowed into your life. It was about vulnerability, honesty, and understanding that no matter how high you climbed, it was the people by your side who made the journey worth it. The future they were building together wasn't just about business, it was about leaving a legacy that wasn't defined by their wealth or status, but by the impact they had on each other and on the world around them. As they continued to work together, Philip and Marta were both more focused on giving back to the community they had come from. They were passionate about empowering those who had been overlooked, just like Marta had been. They started initiatives to support underrepresented groups in business, funding scholarships for young people interested in economics, and mentoring individuals who, like Marta, had big dreams but no clear path to get there. Marta looked at Philip one evening as they discussed their latest charity initiative. "This is it, Philip," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "This is what I've been waiting for. Not the business success, not the accolades. It's this. The chance to make a real difference." Philip nodded, a deep sense of pride swelling in his chest. "I agree. We're building something that lasts beyond us." As they sat there, planning their next steps, Marta couldn't help but think about how far they had come. From that first encounter at the bistro, to the challenges, the confrontations, the breakthroughs, and the moments of vulnerability they had shared, they had built something real. And as she looked at Philip, she knew that this was just the beginning. Together they would continue to shape the future, not just for themselves, but for others who needed a chance to be seen, heard, and valued. In the end, it was never about power or wealth. It was about the quiet moments they shared, those moments when they didn't need to say anything at all to understand each other. It was the way Philip looked at her across the room, the way he respected her, not just for her intellect but for her heart. As they stood together, hand in hand, watching the sunset over the city they had conquered together, Marta knew that the love they had found wasn't something they had expected, but it was exactly what they needed. They had learned that love wasn't about control. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about trust, partnership, and vulnerability. It was about allowing yourself to be seen, truly seen, and accepting the other person for all that they were, flaws and all. For Marta and Philip, their love had endured because they had allowed it to grow, to evolve, and to be something real. No longer constrained by power dynamics, no longer focused on status, they had built something beautiful, a love that was as strong as the foundation they had laid in their business, and as enduring as the future they would create together. Their journey had been a difficult one, filled with challenges and setbacks, but it had also been a journey of growth, of learning, and of realizing that the greatest success they could achieve was not in the profits they made, but in the lives they touched and the love they shared. As the sun set, casting its golden light over the city, Marta turned to Philip, her heart full. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Philip smiled, his hand resting on hers. "Yes, Marta. Together, we're just getting started." And in that moment, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it as partners, as equals, and as two people who had found something deeper than business, something that would last a lifetime. As the years passed, Marta and Philip continued to build their empire, but more importantly, they built a life together, a life defined not by wealth or success, but by the strength of their connection, their love, and their unwavering belief in each other. They had learned that the greatest riches weren't found in numbers or transactions, but in the moments that brought them closer, in the challenges they faced side by side, and in the way they had transformed not just their business but their hearts. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony of their office building, looking out at the city that had witnessed their journey, Marta turned to Philip. The city lights twinkled below them like stars, each one representing a story, a dream, a possibility. She spoke quietly, but with a deep sense of purpose in her voice. "You know, when I first started this journey, I never imagined that I'd be here, standing beside you, not just as a partner in business, but as someone I've learned to trust, to love. What I've come to realize is that the path we take in life isn't always straight. There are twists and turns, moments of doubt, times when it feels like we're fighting against the world. But it's through those struggles that we discover who we really are and what we're truly capable of." Philip nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "And we've learned something important, haven't we? That the greatest success isn't about how much you've built or how much you've acquired. It's about the people you become along the way. It's about the choices you make and the way you show up for those who matter." Marta smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It's about growth, personal growth, professional growth, and learning to believe in yourself, even when it feels like the world is telling you otherwise. We've faced so much, but we never gave up on each other, and that's the greatest victory of all." She turned to face him fully, her eyes shining with a quiet intensity. "So to everyone who's listening, remember this. No matter how hard the road gets, no matter how many times you face rejection or feel like giving up, never stop believing in your own strength. Keep pushing forward. Embrace the challenges. Use every setback as a stepping stone. Because in the end, the obstacles you face will only make you stronger. And the love and trust you build along the way will be your true legacy." Philip stepped closer to her, his hand resting gently on hers. "And when you find someone who believes in you, someone who sees the best in you even when you can't see it yourself, hold on to them. Build something meaningful together. Because success isn't just about achieving your dreams, it's about doing it with the people who lift you up, who challenge you, and who make you better." Together, they looked out at the city, the promise of tomorrow glowing brightly before them. They had built their empire, yes, but more than that, they had built a love, a partnership, and a future that would continue to inspire, to grow, and to shine for years to come. Let this speech serve as a reminder. The path to success is not just about the destination. It's about the journey, the lessons learned, and the relationships that shape us along the way. Stay true to yourself, embrace your struggles, and trust in the process. And above all, never stop believing in the power of your own story. You are capable of more than you know, and the world is waiting for you to write the next chapter.